We're going to talk, well, as most of us know, in January of 2020, after a long-awaited fight in Congress, the boys down there and ladies down there on Pennsylvania Avenue agreed to vote for Secure Act. Let me tell you the premise of the Secure Act. It was really enacted to help younger and lower income people save for retirement. Because there's a tax cost with this, Congress, in their almighty wisdom, decided that the best thing to do is they would increase the tax to the beneficiaries of the IRAs. So I'm here to talk about what that means to you, and as far as the different changes with the Secure Act and what you can do to counteract some of the issues that may be down the line. So number one, let's take a look at the Secure Act. In front of you, you'll see there's a table. Depending upon what your age is, the IRS in publication 590/B, as in Bravo, releases every year an update. Well, I shouldn't say that, not every year. It depends upon when the life expectancy changes. They did one just a few years ago, but they have a life expectancy table. So as you can see, the IRS says that if you're 70 years old, in order to figure out what your required minimum distributions are, you take the prior year's December 31st value, you divide it by the 27.4. Now, as I put in front of you there, I converted that to a simple percentage. So at age 70, you have to take out 3.64%. As you get older, that percentage goes up. Now, in times past, prior to the Secure Act, you would have to start your distributions at age 70 and a half. You could delay until the next year, but that means that you would have to take both that year's and the prior year's RMD. So most people would usually take it out in the year that they turn age 70 and a half. Under the new Secure Act, starting in 2020, the new required minimum distribution age is age 72. So as you can see, it's a 3.9%. However, what I find interesting is that no one really has talked about what this means to the beneficiaries, because if you delay taking money out of your IRA for 2 years, this could have a traumatic effect on what your beneficiaries actually pay in RMD and the tax on that IRA. So what to do about it? Delay or take now. Retirement plans have a lien on them. I think what most people don't understand is they don't look at their retirement plans like a house. I look at it and say, hey, look, if you have a house, there is a certain percentage of that house that you don't own if you have a mortgage on it. So no one really comes to me and says, well, I have a $700,000 house worth $1 million. What do I mean? Well, if you have $1 million house, people come to me and they'll say, I got $1 million house. Well, what about the $300,000 mortgage? Oh, yeah, I guess I have $700,000 house. And the way to look at an IRA or any kind of retirement plan is you have a lien on that account for whatever the tax bracket is in that given year. Now, that will help us determine what to do with the IRA going forward, because we can take a look at where we are within our tax situation. But I think the first thing to do is just to come to some acceptance that our retirement plan is minus the taxes. That equals the net IRA value. And so now what we'll do is we're going to take a look at some tax rates. And what I want to do is kind of bring to your attention a few things. One is, let's go back to 1915. We saw that tax brackets went way up, and all of a sudden we see the roaring 20s. In the roaring 20s, there were 3 recessions that lasted about 15 months. But all in all, the stock market went absolutely bonanza. So if we look at here in 1925 or so, this was right after the 1923 recession. So what they did is they lowered taxes to an all-time low, right, within that period. And if we take a look at what happened after that, all of a sudden taxes are low until when? The stock market crash of 1929. Now, I want to bring up 2 factors that a lot of people are commenting on within the media. First off, our current situation has absolutely nothing to do with the 1929 crash. You'll see these little snippets where somebody will say, Well, in the 1929 crash, there was a stimulus package, and 15 months later, we went into the worst recession of all time. You know, these people, they're selling Bitcoin, they're selling gold, they're selling annuities. What they failed to bring up is the full story. So I'm going to kind of mix in a little bit about what's going on here with the Secure Act, but also debunk a bunch of the fake information that is out there that is really designed to get you scared to do something that is not appropriate. So back in 1929, yes, the stock market did in fact crash. You know, the mentality that President Hoover had back then was the government would actually pay you to replace a sick donkey versus paying you to take care of a sick child. That was the mentality back then. And when the stock market crashed, there was two dynamics back then that are very, very different today. First, on the stock market, there was no Securities Exchange Commission. There was no regulatory arm. There was pump and dump, false information. Most stocks went up based upon insider trading. It was a complete Wild West scam show. And when that whole thing started tumbling down because people said, well, wait a minute, I'm paying $100 for a stock that has absolutely no earnings, and it's not even a company that's even around. The whole stock market tumbled because it had no foundation to it. We have a completely different situation today. Doesn't mean that you're not going to find the MCIs or the Enrons. There's still going to be that 1/10%. But we have a 99% compliant stock market, meaning that if I want to look up who the CEO is, how much in stock options they've issued, how much in debt that they have, how much in a dividend they have, how much in sales do they have, and what countries and territories they're in, I can look up all of that accurate and audited information today. None of that was available back in 29. So how did people buy stocks back then? Well, some guys on the street, and they pass insider, hey, did you hear about John's Hay Company? John's Hay Company is going to go off the map. So everybody runs in and buys John's Hay Company. Well, John's Hay Company might not even have been a real company, or it might have been some guy in a shack with a shingle. And everybody then finds out there was no actual premise to this. That's how that market worked back then. It did not have the kind of regulation or compliance that we have today. The information systems back then were also not what they are today. So let's go back to this little section in time here that you can see in 1928 to 29. So the first thing that happens is the stock market crashes. The government steps in and they try to give a stimulus package. It doesn't work. Why? Because right after that, the banking system crashed. Now, you got to do the research on this, because people will say, well, the stimulus crashed and it didn't help the stock market crash, and so then the next thing to fail was the banking system. Well, let me explain why the banking system failed. Back, in 1928-29, when there was a run on the banks, first off, there was anywhere between 40 to 50% of the banks that were not even a part of the Federal Reserve. They were not a part of the FDIC system. And there was also what they called false banking or false booking. This would be where a bank, if they had a balance sheet, what they would do is, let's say you deposited a check at branch A, and then branch A sent it to branch B, which might be a centralized unit, and then branch B sent it to branch C, which was the national. Every one of those bank branches would actually count that check on their balance sheets. It was just a horrible, horrible banking system. And when it crashed, the banks didn't have the balance sheets that people thought that they had because of this inaccurate banking system. Then what happened is there was a lot of what they referred to back then as country banks. Now, country bank just simply meant that it was not a part of the Federal Reserve System. And what that meant is that they didn't necessarily have the amount of cash on hand. So when, all these crowds of people would go to this little country bank to try to take the cash out because they were afraid, because, people still weren't back to work. There was 25% unemployment. The message was the banks are failing. The banks are failing. They make a run on the bank. The bank doesn't have enough cash. So now you got this national problem where the banks don't have the cash to give to the people. Today, it's a little different. We have a credit system. We didn't have the credit system back then. We have credit cards. We have home equity loans. We have a lot of things we didn't have back then. In addition, we have a banking system that actually has regulatory oversight. Now, prior to 2008, remember, it wasn't the banking system that destroyed it. It was the mortgage system that destroyed it. And that was a problem then, which is why we fell apart in 2008. We don't have that problem right now. Are people in more debt than they should be? Yes. Did companies borrow more than they should have with lower interest rates during the last 10 years? Yes, they did. But we don't have the balance sheet inaccuracies that we did back then. So when I hear these things, people are coming out and saying, oh, well, look what happened in the 29 crash. They issued this stimulus, and then all of a sudden, the whole thing fell apart in 15 months. Come on. Don't lie to the public. Stop the fake news. It's just garbage. Don't try to scare people. If you're going to give the facts, give the real facts. Do the research and give the real facts. The real facts are we have no parity in today's stock market crash or the unemployment that we did back then. There is no parity. This is based upon a virus, a healthcare condition. It's not based upon a false stock market. It's not based upon a faulty banking system. This is a system that is out of work because of a health problem. And there's a repairable future based upon a vaccine and based upon reemployment. And a lot of times people are saying today even, well, what if there's a second wave? Well, we're anticipating that. People are mad at the stock market because they're saying, how come the stock market's going up with all these people unemployed? Because the people in the stock market are doing exactly what I'm saying right now. They're looking at the virus as a healthcare issue and the reemployment. We don't have an economic problem. We have a healthcare problem. So let's go back to the tax rates and what actually happened. So then we all know that FDR gets elected. FDR comes in and says, okay, we're going to create a couple different programs. One is, oh boy, now I'm going back to my economics history. I think it was called the CCC, and it was the Community Civil Corps, I think it was. So forgive me if I'm wrong on that, but basically it was where FDR came in and said, we're going to issue government checks. We're going to put all of those people, and I think if I remember correctly, it was the unemployed, the single person, and we're going to put them to work. Hoover Dam was built. There was new roads across the United States built. They planted trees. They planted everything, right? So they improved the country. That's the one way that he put people back to work. The second one was monetary stimulus. They put money into the system. This way, you could have people that would be autonomously spending, meaning, the government's not spending. The third thing that they did is the government started spending money on their own. They bought tanks and they bought buildings and they employed people and et cetera. So there was three basic tenets that FDR did to make the recovery happen. However, the federal government had to issue this money. Now, when they issued the money, obviously the government is more in debt. So what did the government have to do? This is what I've been talking about now for 5 weeks, 6 weeks almost, that the government is going to have to raise tax rates. So let's look at history. So I don't have the stock market overlay, but you can see here the stock market goes up, stock market comes down. They lower tax rates. This is exactly what they're doing right now. They are giving you all kinds of tax stimulus, like net operating losses are on hold. Section 431 is on hold. There's all kinds of things that they're doing from a tax standpoint. They're saying you can take money out of your IRA and pay it back over 3 years. You can double your 401k loan. You can put off taking your required minimum distributions. They did a lot of the same things that they did right here in 1929. They lowered the tax rates to try to give stimulus into the market. Well, you could see here what happened is they started seeing this increase in the stock market. They started seeing people get reemployed. Here comes FDR. He says, okay, now what we got to do is in order to pay that back, how are we going to do it? We're going to tax the American public. This is just simple economic math, and it's going to happen again. And so the point of today's discussion is really to prepare you for what's coming. Now listen, none of us have a crystal ball, so we can't pinpoint the date and time when this is going to happen. But come on, we don't need a crystal ball to say if they're going to issue $6 to $7 trillion in stimulus. what is that going to really do? Now, some of the other fears that people have had and brought up to me is, what about deflation? Well, they had deflation during the 1929 crash. Why? Because people weren't buying things. Look at what just happened to oil, right? So $8 a barrel. And so we are going to see deflation, but again, it is a different system than in 29. Today, we could see a rebound and a spending back to where we've never seen before. And keep in mind, this is, in the 20s is when we had what they called the Roaring 20s, where business was very good from beginning to end of the night, from at the end of World War I until 1929. So what happens now? Well, how will the stimulus and Social Security shortfall be paid for? Well, it's going to be quite simple. This is not rocket science. I mean, they're going to have to increase tax rates again across all income levels. Here's what I think that they're going to do. They're going to impose pre-2000 tax penalties on retirement plans. This used to be called the income in respect of decedents. They got rid of that, a few years back, but prior to 2000, there was a penalty on retirement plans over $750,000. Depending upon where you lived, it could cause a top-level tax of up to 70% on retirement plans. They're going to have to turn Social Security into a needs-based program like Medicaid. It's interesting. I was listening to the president. I think his name is, I don't want to get this wrong. Langenmore, the guy that created Home Depot. And he said, this is ridiculous. He says, they send me a Social Security check. He said, what congressman is going to be courageous enough at this point to say, guess what? If you have enough money, we're going to start taking away Social Security. I've been saying this for years. They've been knocking off people that have too much in retirement plans and IRAs, and they're saying, hey, if you have too much of an RMD, we're going to take a penalty from you for Medicare. And I said this over and over again. They're going to do the same exact thing for Social Security. I just didn't know when, but I really believe that this is going to happen in the next few years. This kind of goes back to one of the prior broadcasts that I made about when to take your Social Security. I wouldn't wait. I would not wait. I think they're going to bring back the estate tax. They've made that estate tax, about $23 million. Anything above that, you pay estate tax. Anything below that right now, you don't have an estate tax. Now, that was due to sunset, meaning it was due to come back to an $11 million limit about 2026. However, I think that they're going to do that a lot faster. Now, I also think that they're going to bring back the ordinary income tax on capital gains. In my 35, or going on 36 years now, I've seen them go back and forth. I don't know how many times. If I were to guess, maybe 5 or 6 times on capital gains. One economic situation, they come in and they say, okay, we're going to lower capital gains tax brackets to 15%. And then they say, sorry, we need money, so we're going to put capital gains back to ordinary income tax. This goes back to a prior broadcast about how important it is for you to do tax loss harvesting and push forward capital losses. Because those capital losses that might be paper losses, you develop $100,000, $300,000, $1 million in paper losses, meaning you didn't physically lose money, but you have a paper loss. And you keep carrying that forward until to the point where they turn capital gains back into income taxes. I think you're going to be pretty happy that you've got that loss carry forward. So when do we take out IRAs and retirement plans? Well, the goal is we take them out when tax rates are low. I mean, the problem that I've had, and this goes back to my recognition of the human psychology behind taxes, is going back to 1996 when Roth conversions first came out back in 96. Was it 96 or 98? Either way, it was a long time ago. I remember when I'd go to clients and I'd say, you know what, mathematically, I figured out that it's better that you pay the tax now than prolonging it. And even though we could mathematically figure it out, there's a lot of clients that go, I just can't bring myself to paying the tax. I can't bring myself to it. That'd be like me having $1 million house with a $300,000 mortgage, and the mortgage company calls me up and says, you know what, I just want you to pay off, if you give me $200,000 right now, we'll clear your mortgage. Well, I don't know about you, but I would scrimp, save, and look between the cushions on my couch for pennies to come up with $200,000 to pay off that mortgage. That's a 30% savings. Now flip the tables. You've got an IRA, and that IRA has a huge tax built in. I mean, what are you going to do to try to reduce that tax? So pay it when the tax rates are low. So from now until 2022, I think that we're safe in trying to perform these tax strategies. However, I do believe 2022 is my estimated timeline when they're going to pop taxes up so high, it's going to just pin our ears back. Now, take out when you can move shares at a lower value, meaning you can move them to a Roth IRA. Do that when the shares are down. So you've got a double whammy. You've got the tax rates that are lower right now, and you might have share prices that are lower. But, follow your financial planner's lead so that you're making sure that when you're moving those shares, you're not doing it all at once, because that's just market timing, and you're trying to figure out when is the best time to move it. There is no best time. Average it out. So move to tax-protected trusts. You move assets now so that in the future, if they do raise tax rates, your assets are protected within those trusts. And there's also generation skipping trusts. That will protect the taxes into the next generation. What are the new beneficiary rules under the Secure Act? Well, the new beneficiary rules under the Secure Act are the old. Well, let's talk about the old rules first. Well, you could leave your retirement plans if you pass away. You could leave the beneficiary to a child or a grandchild, and they could stretch out the required minimum distributions over their life expectancy. It was a wonderful thing because that way you could minimize the taxes and give the highest end result. Under the new rules, there is no classification of an RMD any longer. So all assets must be taken out by the end of the 10th year. How about asset protection under the old rules for a married person? Well, typically what we would look at is, this is the old rules. If we had an IRA at death, we would leave that to an IRA standalone trust. What then we would get the benefit of is that it would protect the beneficiaries from divorce, death, disability, and lawsuit. However, we would have the ability under the old rules where the trustee could pay the RMDs to the beneficiary as long as the beneficiary was not under attack, meaning they weren't in a medical catastrophe, somebody wasn't suing them, they weren't in the middle of a divorce. However, under the Secure Act, there is no definition of RMD, only that all assets must be taken out by the 10th year. Essentially, if we're leaving our assets to a trust to get the asset protection, that essentially freezes the assets for up to 10 years, causing a lump sum in the 10th year. Now, what's the difference if a person was single? Not much different. Really what it meant was we wouldn't leave it to the IRA standalone trust. We could just leave it to the family trust, and the family trust would have what's called conduit language. But it's the same problem and the same issue. So how do you fix it? You rewrite the family trust in the IRA standalone trust. First, you allow a discretionary distribution based upon the trustee's sole discretion, but if the beneficiary is under attack, allow the trustee to take out a distribution, but not distribute it to the person. So they're going to take it out of the IRA, they're going to keep it in trust. This is going to cause a tax to the trust, and that trust tax rate is going to be higher than the ordinary income tax rate. However, I would probably submit, if I had a trust and I was the beneficiary of, and let's say I was under attack, my trustee, I would rather have them take out my distribution, take it out of my IRA, keep it in trust, keep it where it's protected, keep it where it's safe, even if they have to pay a higher tax on it. Now, there's a second section that we can trigger that allows the trustee to take this action under certain circumstances. We include what's called a power of appointment. This is going to be allow the trustee to pass the tax cost to the beneficiary, but not make the trust distribution to the beneficiary. So the tax due can be paid by the trustee as a direct payment to the IRS. How does it work? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say we have $1 million sitting in an IRA retirement plan, or whatever kind of retirement plan it is. And let's say that we have 10 years to distribute that money. And let's say that we figure out that the beneficiary, in order to not jump up to another tax bracket, we could take $100,000 from that $1 million and knock that IRA down by 10% so that it doesn't explode all on us in 1 year. So we take $100,000 out of that retirement plan, and let's say the beneficiary is not under attack, and let's say they need the money to buy a house or whatever. They need a kid's grandkids' education. So the trustee is going to distribute the $100,000 from the IRA to the trust, right? From the trust, then the trustee gives the beneficiaries the funds. The beneficiaries pay the tax. That's under normal circumstances. However, what happens if the beneficiary is under attack? Now what the trustee is going to do, they're still going to take the $100,000 out because we do not want it left in there to accumulate until the 10th year. And the trustee is going to have a couple choices. The first choice is the trustee is going to pay the tax at the trust tax rates. Again, not the best because the trust has a much higher tax rate, but sometimes it's better to say, hey, I'm willing to give up 30-40% of the money than to distribute it to the beneficiary. And if the beneficiary is under attack, the beneficiary loses 100% of the money. Or the other option is the trustee takes the money out and they do what's called a defective action. I know, this always cracks me up. I would say that only the legal community could come up with a trust that's called defective and actually charge to write and draft the trust. It is actually called a defective trust, and what it simply means is that the trust can hold the assets, but they could pass the tax liability on to somebody else so that the trust doesn't pay the tax. So the trustee sends the beneficiary a 1099, but pays the IRS directly for the tax due for the beneficiary. This will allow the trust to hold those assets in case the beneficiary is under attack. So we've been working with a couple different groups on trying to develop that language. And I could say in no uncertain terms, it has not been easy to make sure that we're hitting all the chords, making sure that we're giving the asset protection as well as preventing the tax from exploding on the beneficiary. We're estimating that somewhere around the middle of May of 2020, we're going to have some of that language done and be ready to start amending or not amending, but rewriting the trust that we have. To wrap it up today, if you've not ordered the book that I wrote back in 2016, which is Total Retirement Freedom, I think last check, I think we've got about 8 or 9 of those books left. We had a whole bunch of them that the publisher sent us as PR stuff, and we've just been sending them out because as people are stuck at home, it's really going to give you a good foundation as to how to structure your retirement plan, how to structure your tax plan, how to structure your distribution, what to look out for in asset allocation, and then also how to use a lot of the tools that we use with our clients. So if you want a free copy of that, you can give us a call, 844-702-1040. And then lastly, join in on our YouTube page for new videos. Best thing to do is just Google H&H Retirement on YouTube. You'll find our YouTube channel. Just hit the little red subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified of any of our upcoming webinars or any of our broadcasts. If you want a schedule of the upcoming broadcast, at the bottom you'll see in red, go to hhrdm.com/events. And there's a whole broadcast schedule of how you can join in and learn more while you're at home. With that in mind, hey, this is Ken Himmler.